And welcome everybody to another edition of the Brody File here in glorious sunny Washington, D.C. It is not snowing, and so hey, we're outside the stuffy old studio. All right, let's begin this week by talking about CPAC. It is the big conservative conference of the year, conservatives getting together to hear, quite frankly, a lot of these soon-to-be presidential candidates speaking in front of a very, very important audience. More on that as we travel to CPAC here in D.C. And so it begins. Although the calendar reads 2015, the 2016 presidential race is clearly underway, at least in some circles. Among the big names making their way to the stage, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Chris Christie, Marco Rubio, Rick Perry, and many more. But it's Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker who is trending, as they say today. He came in a strong second in the straw poll and has made points with conservatives by taking on unions in his state. He was holding court at CPAC.
We have a president who measures success in government by how many people are dependent on the government. We should measure success by just the opposite, by how many people are no longer dependent on the government.
In our one-on-one interview, we asked the governor about a likely White House run. You hear the chants, "Run, Scott, run, run, Scott." I can sing it for you. What's the reaction inside of you when you hear that?
Well, it's humbling. I mean, I appreciate the fact that people have noticed what we've done. They are hungry for authentic leadership, that people tell them what they're going to do, straight talk, as you just said, but don't just fight for it. Actually deliver on it and win.
There are a lot of big storylines here at CPAC. One of the biggest centers on Jeb Bush. It looks like he is going to run for president, but he supports controversial policies like Common Core educational standards and comprehensive immigration reform. So the question here at CPAC, how will Jeb Bush be received?
Please welcome to the stage Governor Jeb Bush.
Both cheers and boos greeted him as he came out, and a small number even walked out of the room. For Bush, this became an opportunity to explain himself to a somewhat skeptical base, especially on immigration.
The simple fact is there is no plan to deport 11 million people. We should give them a path to legal status where they work, where they don't receive government benefits, where they don't break the law, where they learn English, and where they make a contribution to our society. That's what we need to be focused on.
And what about a third Bush running for president?
I think he's out of touch. You know, obviously when you grow up in a family like that much power, I mean, your father's a president, your brother's a president, you just kind of get out of touch. You know, you're kind of a different echelon than everyday people like you and I.
He has the perfect balance of experience, age, outlook, also very much like in the Hispanic community, which is, you know, I am Hispanic and I am a particular, likeness about that.
It's like we either go with the Hillary Billerys or we're back in the bushes. I don't think it's going to go that way. I think that there's going to be some upsets and some surprises in this election.
Upsets and surprises could be commonplace in one of the largest Republican lineups ever seen by the party's faithful. Conservatives are definitely going to have their say when the primaries get started a little later this year. All right, so who do they like now? Take a look at the straw poll results. First of all, we want to focus in on Rand Paul, first of all, because he was the big winner, 25% of the vote. Why? Because look, he's hip, he's younger, he's libertarian, he's speaking a different language than what the Republicans are used to, and that is resonating with this crowd. We'll see how that plays out throughout the primary season. But here's the full results of all of the straw poll, or at least the top five. Rand Paul, of course, 25%. Coming in second, Scott Walker at 21%. So a good showing by the governor of Wisconsin. More with him in a moment. Third, Ted Cruz, 11%. Notice the drop off, 21 for Walker, 11% for Cruz. Right behind Cruz, actually pretty much tied with Cruz, is Ben Carson, the good doctor, who we know and love here at the Brody File. And coming in fifth, we have Jeb Bush, 8%. Actually pretty respectable for Jeb Bush, and he did a pretty good job there in front of the CPAC crowd. It was a tough audience, but he seemed to kind of at least get through that initial primary, so to speak, onslaught. All right, well, look, let's talk about Governor Scott Walker for a moment. Wisconsin, this guy has been through every recall you can imagine. I mean, they've tried to recall him twice. He's run for governor 3 times now, and boy, I got to tell you, this is a guy that could actually fill the void if conservatives don't want to go with Jeb Bush, the mainstream establishment candidate. Here comes Scott Walker along. He could be the guy that actually wins the nomination if Jeb Bush falters. Have a look at our conversation with the good governor. You stand on principle. There are your critics that will say, well, they'll say, wait a minute, but then he doesn't compromise. Then he, you took on the unions and you were pretty solid on, very solid on that. But therefore, where's the room for compromise? What's your answer to those folks?
Well, I said in the end, what people want more than anything, even people in the center, what they want more than anything are people who can win for them, win for the hardworking taxpayer, someone who's fighting for their interest and winning out there. If the lack of compromise led to dysfunction like we often see in Washington, that'd be one thing. But in our case, we laid out a clear plan. We listened to the people. We then communicated with them, and then we acted. A lot of politicians talk, but they never act. In our case, we act on the things that we hear about, and then we talk about, and we go out and do. And I think people want someone who gets the job done. They're hungry for people who can lead and get the job done.
The liberal media, think they're out to get those Republican candidates running for president like yourself?
Well, I've seen it, particularly the last two elections, in the recall and the reelect. We had media from all across the country, both in 2012 in our recall election and last fall leading up to the November 2014 election. They're out in even bigger numbers now. And what's interesting, I push back on them. Part of the reason why we developed ouramericanrevival.com is to get out and talk about transferring power from Washington out to the states, but it's also to push back on the narrative that comes from some in the media in Washington and New York that feel like they want to have these manufactured media crises, these so-called gotcha questions, instead of talking about to people what they really care about. When I was in Green Bay the other day, or I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan the night after that, what people talk about are everyday issues about growing the economy, about reforming things and putting power back in their hands, and increasingly about being concerned about radical Islamic terrorism and what it means around the world.
ISIS, as it relates to airstrikes, which this president is fond of at this point, more than airstrikes, boots on the ground? What's your position here?
If you are serious about this scourge, which it is a virus that left unchecked will eat up more and more of this world, and eventually will find a way to wash up on American soil. We need to take the fight to them before they take the fight to us. And so what I mean by that is we shouldn't rule anything out. Boots on the ground is one option. Certainly if I ran and was honored to be Commander-in-Chief, I would take that very seriously. I have 3 wristbands on my arm that remind me of 3 different Gold Star families who asked me to wear these in honor of their sons that they lost in war. So I wouldn't take that responsibility lightly. But I also know, as much as I don't want to ever have to send someone into harm's way, I don't want these men to have died in vain or any other men or women like them. And what I mean by that is we should be willing to put boots on the ground if that's what it's going to take to eradicate radical Islamic terrorists here and around the world. We shouldn't do that in a way that's foolish. We should be determined, and we should do it in a way where we reaffirm our allegiance with Israel, our primary ally in the region, something I think we've failed to do miserably over the last few years, and then broaden our base, to take our traditional allies like the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, Japan, and others, but then bind with, I think, increasingly the opportunity to build a coalition even within the Arab community, certainly with Egypt, excuse me, and Jordan of late, but even with others like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, to say we need a global coalition to eradicate the virus that has become this terrorist act and do it before it spreads.
You mentioned Egypt, and General Sisi has really been pretty outspoken on this, and yet the president doesn't seem to want to engage on this. Baffling to you?
This is shocking to me that times like this, someone asked me the other day what I thought of the president. I said, more than anything, I'm frustrated. Not as a Republican, not as a conservative. I'm frustrated as an American because this is the time when now more than ever we need our commander-in-chief to lead. We need someone to step up and recognize it for what it is. Sadly, even at these conferences, the White House can't even call it what it is, which is radical Islamic terrorism. You need to know the enemy before you can address the challenges of the enemy. And it's increasingly frustrating to me as well when I see not only the president sending mixed messages to Israel, but goodness sakes, when you have the prime minister requesting an opportunity to address the Congress, to lay out the very real concerns he has about Iran, it is extremely frustrating to me that you got the president and even some of the members of his parties that somehow are dismissing that. We should be standing with our ally. We should be showing him and his country the respect they deserve.
Scott Walker here on the Brody File. All right, one guy that's making waves anywhere he goes actually is Dr. Ben Carson. Of course, you know we spent some time with him down in West Palm Beach at his home, him and his wife Candy. Well, he has been, let's just say, in the news recently with some controversial remarks about gays and prison and oi gewalt. He got in a bit of a hot mess. Have a look.
You think they have control over their sexuality?
Absolutely.
You think being gay is a choice?
Absolutely.
Why do you say that? because a lot of people who go into prison straight, and when they come out, they're gay. So did something happen while they were in there? Ask yourself that question.
Never go to prison, and you know there's a whole theory of dominance.
Wait a minute. I said a lot of people who go in, come out. Are you denying that that's true?
I am not denying that that's true, but I am denying that that's as a basis of understanding homosexuality.
All right, well, so here's the apology by Dr. Carson. Quote, in a recent interview on CNN, I realized that my choice of language does not reflect fully my heart on gay issues. I regret that my words to express that concept were hurtful and divisive. I simply have decided I'm not going to really talk about that issue anymore because every time I gain momentum, the liberal press says, well, let's talk about gay rights. And that's exactly how Dr. Carson feels about the issue. Look, he has no love for the mainstream media, and of course they don't have any love for him either, and that is a storyline that will play out in 2016 for sure. All right, when we come back from Washington, D.C., the Ukraine and pastors, how Jesus and their pastors' network are making a difference in the Ukraine. Back in a moment. And welcome back, everybody, to Washington, D.C. on this beautiful, glorious, sunny day. Look, a lot of stories we cover here on the Brody File have to do with faith and politics. And this story is not only no exception, this is the perfect Brody File story because it involves the Ukraine, politics, of course, and war, as you can see here. So many have died over in that conflict between Russia and Ukrainian rebels, and all of that has been transpiring. At the same time, faith, Jesus, on display actually in the Ukraine, all because of the American Pastors Network. And we're going to explain more about them as we had a chance to sit down and visit with them recently here in the studio.
The American Pastors Network was born out of the realization that in this country we are in big trouble. But primarily we don't have a political problem, we have a spiritual problem that must be dealt with truth preached from the pulpit, and we believe that pastors in the pulpit are uniquely called of God to preach the Word of God, and that alone is what can change hearts, which then changes families, which changes communities, which can change a nation. And our intent really is to call out those pastors, to equip and identify those pastors who are committed to the authority of Scripture, believe in salvation by faith in Christ alone, and have a backbone sufficient to preach the whole counsel of God. That giving that voice and that unified voice, which is what the Pastors Network is all about, to give the ability for pastors to speak with a unified voice. We're building out state chapters and giving a framework for which pastors can both speak, know how to speak, know when to speak.
Tell me a little bit about what's going on in the Ukraine, because this is a very important part of what the American Pastors Network is about. And you're right there on the ground. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved and what's happening there specifically as it relates to APN.
Well, it's really a historical moment, and it concerns me that we in America are often missing the real central events that are taking place or have transpired. And we stand on the Word of God. We believe in truth. We speak truth to power. And some of those first meetings opened up a door of a whirlwind of other meetings, and APN came in. We've held a leadership summit. I brought in our president, Sam Rohr, from American Pastors Network. We brought in others. David Barton was a key hit, teaching what are the biblical principles that undergird government. And since then, I've been living almost exclusively in Kiev, trying to engage members of parliament. There was a new election. For the first time, there's no communist representation in the Ukraine parliament. We're able to talk about God and the Bible and government in the same sentence, and they're eager to learn. You know, why do we believe in property rights and the protection of the freedom of speech and freedom of assembly? Where do these things come from? And there is a spirit of independence in the Ukraine. It's amazing.
The folks from the American Pastors Network doing a great job on the front lines there for Jesus. All right, when we come back, we head to Selma, Alabama, the voting rights issue and Bloody Sunday. John Jessup down there with that story next. And welcome back, everybody, to Washington, D.C. and the Brody File. Time now to head to Selma, Alabama. Brody File's not going to do it, but John Jessup is. I know he does movie reviews and all of that cool stuff, but boy, did he experience something very, very special down in Selma, Alabama. 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, the Voting Rights Act and everything that came about and transpired afterwards. It's a memorable time in United States history and a key pivotal time as well. John with more on that.
From around the state.
I'm coming in from Mumford, Alabama. It was 2 hours.
To as far as New York State.
We drove 18 hours.
18 hours?
Yeah.
Black and white, young and old, came to Selma to remember the heroes and the movement that changed America.
And that change made even more apparent by the diversity of this crowd who are here to honor what happened 50 years ago on Bloody Sunday.
On March 7th, 1965, state and local police beat, tear-gassed, and injured dozens of peaceful protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for their demonstration demanding the right to vote. The event shocked the nation and paved the way for the landmark Voting Rights Act. Decades later, law enforcement agencies again walked the bridge, this time leading a march in unity instead of trying to stop it.
I just think about all the people that went through to get us where we are. And so I just wanted to give my part in it. This is like giving back.
For many, it was not only a chance to look back, but an opportunity to look forward.
The people who sacrificed 50 years ago made it possible for many of us to be in Congress today. We're celebrating that fact and also recognizing the fact that there's a lot more work to do.
Speaking at the foot of the historic bridge, President Obama credited the foot soldiers of justice who opened doors for him and countless others.
Young people behind the Iron Curtain would see Selma and eventually tear down that wall. Young people in Soweto would hear Bobby Kennedy talk about ripples of hope and eventually banish the scourge of apartheid.
An estimated 40,000 people came to Selma, including around 100 members of Congress.
There'll be some day that when they'll come commemorate this, there won't be the folks that actually walked across the bridge being able to cross with you.
People like Vera Collins Booker, a retired nurse who lived through that dark day and treated the wounded.
Did you ever think this day would come?
I dreamed it because we all were trying to vote and we were trying to get registered and we all did. And now I never miss a time to go vote. I don't care if it's raining or however it is, I'm going to always vote.
It was there at Brown Chapel AME Church where after just taking communion, parishioners took their first steps in their march toward equality and justice. Some say it's also important to remember that the civil rights movement began in the Christian church, dedicated to exalting the name and showing the love of Jesus to all.
The religious component of it is too often underestimated. People marched, they said their prayers, they got on their knees, they sang hymns, and they went out and believed they were right, and they made a decision they would not respond with violence.
Reflections of a history defined by division today show healing and unity and a legacy still on the march.
Thanks, John. John Jessup in Selma, Alabama. All right, when we roll on, we're going back to CPAC, and we're going back with, that's right, Amber C. Strong. Political is back. Oh, what does she have in store? We find out next. And welcome back, everybody, to Washington, D.C., this edition of the Brody File. Well, look, we try to be hip on this show. I mean, I'm wearing the purple tie. It's got to be a little bit hip, but I really don't cut it. But you know who does? Amber C. Strong, our political correspondent.
Thanks, David, for this edition of Pop Political. We are here at CPAC 2015, and I have one mission: debunking myths. We've all heard the myths of the boring conservative party.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill.
Not today. Today we are debunking myths by showing you the sights and sounds of the excitement here at CPAC 2015. You know, nothing says excitement like Donald Trump, unless, of course, he's saying this. Recently, Donald Trump announced that he is seriously considering a bid for the presidency, which leaves one burning question: what happens to Celebrity Apprentice? We caught up with Trump here at CPAC and we asked him that question.
Celebrity Apprentice, a huge hit. A lot of folks say, well, there's no way he's going to give up that. What is your response to that?
It's very hard for me to give it up. They want to renew it, as you know. The ratings have been fantastic, and they want to renew it. They've already informed me they want a renewal. And I'm probably the only one in many, many years that said, I'm not doing a renewal because I have something else to do. Now, if things don't work out, I guess maybe I would do it if everybody's still around and we want to do that. But I've actually told them that I have to put it on hold because I have other things that I'm doing. And by other things, I think you know what I'm talking about.
David, I think the real question is, did Vivica Fox ever get her phone back? See, I need you to ask the real questions when you're in with the Trump. That's okay. In other pop political news, one last thing. Frank Underwood is not here, but for fans of House of Cards, the show did begin its new season on February 27th. That is it for Pop Political here at CPAC. I'm Amber Strong. David, back to you.
Amber C. Strong putting the pop in Pop Political. Back in a moment with the Oy Vey moment of the week. And welcome back, everybody, to the Brody File here in Washington, D.C. All right, look, before we leave you, it is time to take a deep breath, because it's this week's Oy Vey moment of the week. All right, well, look, our next story, what can I tell you? You see all this right around me? See that? It's air. That's what this is. Very, very valuable stuff. I kid you not, because a person at a Kanye West concert decided to put some air in a Ziploc bag and decided to sell it on eBay, and it went for about $60,000 or so. That's right, Kanye West air, rarefied air in a Ziploc bag, $60,000. Are you kidding me? I believe that's Oy Vey. As a matter of fact, it may have risen to the Oy Gavolt level, which is high in the Jewish hierarchy of terms, I guess, or whatever. Anyhow, we've decided, I think Amber C. Strong, are we not? We're going to sell this air, Brody File air. Yeah, confirming we are going to sell Brody File air, hot air, for about $1.99 per pound. And believe me, we got a lot of pounds to go around. All right, that does it for this week. Until next time, everybody, have a great week. God bless.